My stepmother smiled as her lawyer handed me the legal notice, completely unaware that she had just walked into a financial trap my grandfather spent years setting up. "We are taking the estate, the properties, and everything your father left behind," she sneered, her voice dripping with artificial victory. Everyone in the family thought I was a naive fool for staying silent while she methodically stripped my father of his wealth during his final days. They thought I was left with absolutely nothing but a broken heart. What she didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that the $40 million left by my late grandfather was never my father's to lose. It was safely locked away in a private trust under my name. Follow my story until the end to see the exact moment her smile turned to pure horror, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. My name is Emily Dawson. I'm 28 years old, and as a captain in the military, I've been trained to analyze threats and keep my composure under extreme pressure. But nothing in my training prepared me for the cold-blooded warfare that invaded my own family. It all started with my grandfather, a self-made tycoon who built a $40 million shipping empire from nothing. He was a brilliant man, but above all, he was a realist. He knew exactly how wealth could attract the worst kinds of human vultures. Before he passed away, he looked me dead in the eye and told me that my father, though kind, was far too trusting for his own good. That was why my grandfather bypassed him entirely, locking the entire $40 million fortune into a private ironclad trust under my name, keeping it an absolute secret from everyone. The wisdom of his decision became horrifyingly clear when Evelyn walked into our lives. She was decades younger than my father, possessing a sharp, calculated beauty and a voice dripping with synthetic sweetness. Within months of their sudden marriage, she began systematically isolating my father from his oldest friends, his financial advisors, and eventually from me. She viewed our family legacy as a prize to be won. What she didn't realize was that while she was busy manipulating a vulnerable man for his immediate bank accounts, the real empire was completely out of her reach. I watched her smile at her early victories, silently vowed to protect my grandfather's secret, and waited for the right moment to strike. As the months pressed on, my father's health began to decline rapidly, a shadow of the strong man he used to be. Evelyn seized this vulnerability like a predator cornering its prey. She didn't waste a single moment. First, she quietly fired our family's loyal household staff, people who had been with us for over a decade and would have looked out for my father's best interests. In their place, she brought in individuals completely loyal to her. Next, she convinced my father to replace his long-term financial advisors with an aggressive new legal team that answered only to her commands. Soon, the gates to my childhood home were effectively closed to me. Evelyn began restricting my visitation rights, constructing a wall of bureaucratic excuses about my father needing rest or being too weak for visitors. It was a calculated attempt to break my spirit and provoke me into a loud, messy public legal battle. But I refused to play her game. Drawing on my military discipline, chose to comply silently. I deliberately played the role of the passive, grief-stricken daughter who was too overwhelmed by sorrow to fight back. I let Evelyn believe she had completely erased my influence and cleared her path to total victory. While she gloated over her control of the household and her easy manipulation of a dying man, she remained blissfully blind to the fact that she was setting her own trap. The day finally came when my father drew his last breath, leaving behind a profound silence in the home he had worked his entire life to maintain. Just 3 days after the funeral, we gathered in a cold, sterile conference room for the formal reading of his personal will. Evelyn sat across from me, draped in expensive designer mourning clothes, her face a calculated mask of grief that couldn't quite hide the triumphant gleam in her eyes. As the attorney began to read the document, her expectations were fully realized. My father, completely under her spell in his final months, had left her everything under his immediate control. She inherited the historic family mansion, his primary bank accounts, and all the current operational entities of his business. When the attorney finished reading, the room went completely still. He looked up at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort, officially confirming that I had been left absolutely nothing from my father's personal estate. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a smug, satisfied smile spreading across her lips as she waited for my inevitable emotional outburst, tears, or threats of a lawsuit. Instead, I simply closed my notebook, stood up, and thanked the attorney with absolute calm and grace. This total lack of resistance thoroughly unnerved her. She had prepared herself for a massive, dramatic legal battlefield, but my quiet compliance left her standing alone in an empty victory, completely unaware of what was coming next. Just 5 days after the funeral, the illusion of Evelyn's perfect victory completely shattered. She quickly discovered that the primary business accounts she had fought so hard to control were heavily leveraged, drained by my father's extensive medical costs and her own lavish spending. Worse, the historic family mansion was facing massive immediate maintenance debts and property tax liens that she couldn't begin to afford. Panicking and realizing she had inherited a hollow shell instead of a gold mine, Evelyn convinced herself that I was secretly hiding my father's missing millions in offshore accounts. She decided to launch an aggressive offensive. I was sitting in my living room when a shadow fell over the front window. Moments later, my front door was nearly kicked off its hinges as Evelyn marched into my home uninvited. She wasn't alone. Standing right beside her was a ruthless corporate lawyer wearing a bespoke suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase, and sporting a cold, predatory expression. Evelyn didn't even bother with a greeting. Her face was flushed with rage as she slammed a fist onto my dining table, demanding a full, immediate disclosure of all hidden family funds. Her lawyer stepped forward smoothly, his voice sharp as a razor blade, as he issued a brutal ultimatum: hand over the missing fortune immediately, or face a massive multi-million-dollar fraud lawsuit that would destroy my military career. I calmly gestured toward the empty chairs, inviting them to sit down, refusing to let their aggressive entrance rattle my composure. Evelyn remained standing, her arms tightly crossed over her chest, her breathing heavy, with a volatile mixture of desperation and greed. Her corporate lawyer took a seat with a smug, calculated air, immediately opening his thick briefcase and spreading out an array of intimidating legal notices across my table. For the next 10 minutes, I simply sat back and listened to them deliver their high-pressure demands. The lawyer threatened to systematically freeze my personal bank accounts, drag my name through an exhausting probate court battle, and launch a full-scale forensic investigation into my finances if I didn't cooperate. When they finally ran out of breath, the room fell into a heavy silence. I didn't blink, cry, or show a single shred of fear. Instead, I opened my personal desk drawer and pulled out the original trust agreements my grandfather had executed decades ago. I set them firmly on the table and slid them across the polished wood. "You're looking for a missing fortune that never belonged to my father," I said, my voice carrying the absolute authority of a military captain. I watched as the lawyer adjusted his glasses and began skimming the legal pages. I explained that the $40 million empire had been legally protected under my sole name long before Evelyn ever entered the picture. Furthermore, I pointed out a specific clause on the final page. The operational businesses and properties Evelyn had fought so hard to inherit carried millions of dollars in hidden corporate liabilities and toxic debts. Because she had eagerly rushed to claim sole ownership of those entities during the reading of my father's will, those massive financial obligations had officially transferred directly and exclusively to her. The corporate lawyer's eyes darted across the certified pages, his arrogant posture dissolving instantly as his face turned a ghostly shade of pale. He dropped the documents onto the table, his hands visibly shaking as the terrifying reality of the situation finally sank in. Evelyn had spent months plotting to inherit a massive empire, but because she lacked any basic business background, she had blindly signed papers that saddled her with a mountain of operational debt, while I controlled the underlying profitable infrastructure. Evelyn looked back and forth between her panicked attorney and me, her breath catching in her throat as she realized her perfect trap had backfired completely. I leaned forward, locking my eyes onto hers with absolute military precision, and delivered a crushing, non-negotiable ultimatum. I told her she had exactly two choices. She could immediately sign a voluntary transfer deed, handing over the keys to my grandfather's original historic family assets to satisfy the corporate creditors and clear her mounting debts, or she could choose to fight me. If she chose to fight, I promised to unleash my own legal team, force her into immediate personal bankruptcy, and hand over our comprehensive private evidence directly to the authorities for a full forensic audit regarding her elder financial abuse during my father's final months in the hospital. The corporate lawyer leaned over and whispered frantically into her ear, desperately advising her that she had zero legal leverage left and that a criminal trial would ruin her life forever. With trembling hands and tears of frustration streaming down her face, Evelyn grabbed the pen and signed the transfer documents. Her malicious plans were completely ruined, and she left my home with absolutely nothing but the crushing weight of her own greed. 3 months later, I used my grandfather's protected $40 million inheritance to completely clear the debts on our historic family home, restoring it to its former glory. But I knew I couldn't just sit back and enjoy my wealth. Inspired by my grandfather's brilliant planning, I officially established a nonprofit foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable senior citizens from elder financial abuse and predatory manipulation. Now I'm curious about all of you who have listened to my story until the very end. What would you have done if you found yourself in my exact position? Would you have stayed silent as long as I did? Comment your thoughts below. In the meantime, I am leaving 2 other incredible stories on the final screen right now that are absolute channel favorites and will definitely surprise you. Thank you so much for watching.